The tomb guard stood completely still and shaken by the rain, the whispers behind the barrier, the flashing cameras, or the curious tourists. Nothing broke his focus. Until something unexpected happened. Barack Obama, unannounced, stepped onto the plaza, and in that moment, something shifted. Just that morning, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen had opened a letter from a commander who'd passed away years ago. It ended with a quiet, haunting line. "I hope someone truly worthy sees what you do in silence, maybe even a president." Now, standing before him, that hope had become reality. For the first and only time, the guard broke protocol. He stepped forward and spoke a single sentence. The president's face changed instantly. Eyes filled with tears, he reached for his glasses and whispered, "I've never heard anything like that." What did the tomb guard say, and why did it leave the former president speechless? Before we reveal it, be sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Evening descended upon Arlington National Cemetery like a gentle curtain, transforming the sprawling fields of white marble into a sea of shadows and golden light. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen moved with mechanical precision across the black mat before the tomb of the unknown soldier, his polished boots marking time in a rhythm that had become his heartbeat. This was his 1,247th patrol, each step a testament to unwavering dedication that few could comprehend. The weight of his ceremonial rifle felt familiar in Chen's white-gloved grip as he executed the sacred 21 steps that had defined his existence for the past 3 years. South 21 paces, pivot with military sharpness, face east for precisely 21 seconds, turn again to face north for another 21 seconds, then repeat the eternal cycle. These movements had carved themselves into his muscle memory, becoming as natural as breathing, as essential as his pulse. Through blistering summer heat that made his wool uniform cling to his skin and bitter winter cold that turned each breath into visible vapor, Chen had never wavered. Rain had soaked through his clothing, snow had made each step treacherous, but his commitment remained absolute. The tomb guard's sacred promise echoed in his mind with every movement. "My dedication to this sacred duty is total and wholehearted. In the responsibility bestowed on me never will I falter, and with dignity and perseverance my standard will remain perfection." A small group of visitors maintained respectful silence as they witnessed Chen's ritual. An elderly man in a veteran's cap held his weathered hand to his forehead in a trembling salute, while a young woman whispered softly to her child about the importance of honoring those who had served. But Chen's awareness remained laser-focused on his duty, his gaze fixed forward, his consciousness locked in the sacred ceremony that had become his life's purpose. Ever since that transformative day in the mountains of Afghanistan, the dying light filtered through centuries-old oak trees, casting intricate patterns across the memorial grounds. In Chen's peripheral vision, movement caught his attention near the memorial amphitheater. A solitary figure approached with the measured stride of someone who understood the gravity of this hallowed ground. The man wore an understated black coat, his hands clasped respectfully behind his back, his expression carved with deep contemplation. Only when the figure reached the marble ceremonial area did Chen's trained eye recognize the unmistakable silhouette of Barack Obama, the nation's 44th president. Obama positioned himself at the edge of the sacred space, his presence commanding yet deeply respectful of the solemn protocols that governed this place. He made no attempt to approach the tomb itself, instead maintaining the proper distance that protocol demanded. His dark eyes absorbed the scene with the gravity befitting a man who had once held the weight of an entire nation in his hands. Chen continued his methodical march, but something stirred deep within his chest, a recognition that transcended political affiliation or celebrity status. This was a leader who had carried the burden of sending soldiers into harm's way, who had penned letters to families forever changed by loss, who had made decisions that rippled through countless lives. The president's gaze lingered on the array of ribbons adorning Chen's dress uniform, the bronze star with its distinctive valor device, the Purple Heart with its purple and gold ribbon, the Afghanistan campaign medal that spoke of service in distant, dangerous lands. Each decoration represented a story, a moment when duty had demanded something beyond ordinary courage. Obama's own memories stirred as he observed the precise ceremony unfolding before him. Images flashed through his mind of countless briefing rooms, where he had authorized dangerous missions, of midnight phone calls delivering news of casualties, of the crushing weight that accompanied every decision, knowing that real people would bear the consequences. Chen's military bearing remained flawless, every movement a masterpiece of discipline and precision. Yet his mind drifted back to that scorching afternoon in Kandahar province, when his world had exploded into chaos. The improvised explosive device had torn through their convoy's lead vehicle like tissue paper, instantly killing two soldiers and trapping their Afghan interpreter, Ali Nazari, beneath a twisted maze of burning metal. The man's left leg had been nearly severed, blood pooling beneath the wreckage as enemy gunfire erupted from the surrounding ridgeline. Ali had served with Chen's unit for 8 months, becoming far more than just a translator. He had guided them through treacherous terrain that claimed lives daily, interpreting not merely words but crucial cultural nuances that kept American soldiers alive in a land where misunderstanding could prove fatal. The interpreter had a wife named Fatima and 2 young daughters back in Kabul, along with dreams of eventually bringing his family to America, where they could build a life free from the constant terror of Taliban reprisal. But when the moment of crisis arrived, when survival instinct screamed at him to seek cover, Chen had made a different choice. Despite the shrapnel embedded in his own leg, despite blood streaming from a head wound that blurred his vision, despite the very real possibility that attempting a rescue would result in both their deaths, Chen had crawled back toward the burning wreckage. He had lifted Ali's broken body and carried him for 100 meters through sustained enemy fire to reach the extraction point, absorbing 2 additional gunshot wounds in the process. The president maintained his silent vigil, unaware of the intense memories playing out in Chen's mind. Obama's thoughts turned to the countless military families he had comforted during his presidency, the flag-draped coffins he had saluted, the weight of command that never truly abandoned a leader's shoulders. His hand moved, unconsciously, to his coat pocket, where a small object rested, not his own decoration, but a purple heart that had been entrusted to him by the grieving parents of Captain Ryan Jeffords, a Marine who had made the ultimate sacrifice in the streets of Fallujah. As Chen completed another flawless circuit of his patrol, the flood of memories continued to wash over him. Ali had survived that terrible day, but just barely. The interpreter had endured months of surgery and rehabilitation in a military hospital in Germany, fighting to save his mangled leg while learning to walk again. Chen had visited whenever possible, bringing magazines and books, helping translate between Ali and the medical staff, gradually becoming something deeper than just the soldier who had carried him to safety. During one of those hospital visits, as Ali struggled with physical therapy and the psychological trauma of their shared ordeal, the interpreter had pressed a carefully folded letter into Chen's hands. Written in Ali's painstaking English, the words had been chosen with the precision of a man still mastering his adopted language. The letter spoke of bonds that transcended nationality and religion, of sacrifice that knew no borders, of the sacred responsibility that good people carried for those who could not carry themselves. Ali had made Chen promise to keep the letter always, to remember that military service wasn't about accumulating medals or seeking recognition. It was about lifting up those who had fallen. Obama shifted his position slightly, the movement barely perceptible but sufficient to capture Chen's attention. The president's face bore the unmistakable marks of a man who had aged rapidly under the crushing weight of leadership, who had been forced to make impossible decisions and live with their far-reaching consequences. Something in his expression suggested a deep recognition, perhaps an understanding of the shared burden that connected all those who had served in positions of ultimate responsibility. The tomb guard's march continued with mechanical precision, but Chen's thoughts remained fixed on Ali's journey. The interpreter had eventually succeeded in bringing his family to America, settling in Northern Virginia, where he found employment as a translator for the State Department. His new role involved helping other refugees navigate the complex, often overwhelming process of seeking asylum and starting fresh lives. But the trauma of that day in Afghanistan had left permanent scars. Ali walked with a pronounced limp, suffered from nightmares that shattered his sleep most nights, and carried invisible wounds that no medical intervention could fully heal. Chen's own recovery had followed a different but equally challenging path. His physical injuries had healed, leaving only scars and the occasional ache during cold weather. But processing the psychological impact of that day had taken much longer. He had wrestled with survivor's guilt, questioning why he had lived when others had died, struggling with being labeled a hero when he had simply done what any decent soldier would do for a comrade in need. The decision to pursue duty as a tomb guard had emerged from that internal struggle. Here at Arlington, surrounded by the sacred silence of America's most hallowed ground, He could honor not only the unknown soldiers resting beneath the marble slab, but all those who had served and sacrificed throughout the nation's history. Each step of his march became a prayer, each precise turn a moment of remembrance, each hour of duty a way of ensuring that the memory of the fallen would be carried forward into the future. Obama's presence at the tomb was not unusual. He had visited Arlington numerous times during his presidency, laying ceremonial wreaths, offering comfort to bereaved families, paying respects to the nation's fallen heroes. But this particular visit carried a different weight, a personal significance that went beyond official duties. The Purple Heart resting in his coat pocket had belonged to a young Marine who had thrown himself onto an enemy grenade to save his squad, a 23-year-old from Ohio who had written home about his desire to make a meaningful difference in the world. Captain Ryan Jeffords had died on an ordinary Tuesday morning in the violent streets of Fallujah, his final act representing the pinnacle of selfless courage. His parents had presented Obama with their son's Purple Heart not as a political gesture, but as a heartfelt request. They wanted the decoration to find its way to someone who would truly understand its significance, someone who carried others the way their son had carried his men. They had asked the president to seek out the right person, to ensure that their son's legacy would live on through someone worthy of such responsibility. Chen maintained his methodical pace, completely unaware of the profound decision taking shape in Obama's mind. The tomb guard's dedication was absolute and unwavering. He had endured months of rigorous training to earn this position, memorizing the detailed history of Arlington, learning the stories of the unknown soldiers, mastering the precise movements that honored their ultimate sacrifice. He had willingly given up normal social relationships, romantic pursuits, and the typical pleasures enjoyed by men his age, all in service to this sacred mission. The president continued his observation as Chen executed another perfect turn, his movements remaining sharp and precise despite having performed them thousands of times. Something in the young soldier's bearing spoke directly to Obama, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their vastly different positions in life. Both men had chosen to dedicate themselves to something greater than personal ambition. Both had carried burdens that remained largely invisible to others. Both had made sacrifices that went largely unrecognized by the world at large. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the memorial grounds in shades of gold and amber, Obama reached a decision that would have surprised even his closest advisors. His original intention had been to pay quiet respects and depart, as he had done countless times before. But something about this particular moment, about this specific guard, about the weight of the metal in his pocket, compelled him to break with standard protocol. The few remaining tourists began to disperse as evening shadows grew longer across the cemetery. The formal changing of the guard ceremony had concluded hours earlier, leaving Chen to continue his solitary vigil through the approaching night. This was the most sacred time at the tomb. When the crowds had departed, when the only witnesses were the marble guardians and the spirits of those who had given their lives in service to their country, Obama moved forward with deliberate intention, his approach both respectful and determined. He remained outside the ceremonial boundaries, understanding that protocol demanded such respect, but his presence was now unmistakable. Chen's peripheral vision registered the movement, but his extensive training kept him focused on his primary duty. The president waited patiently, demonstrating the same respect for military protocol that he had learned during his years in office, understanding that this ritual was greater than any individual conversation. When Chen reached the northern terminus of his march and executed his precise turn, Obama spoke with the clear, carrying voice of a man accustomed to addressing large audiences. "Sergeant Chen," he said simply, employing the respectful tone he had always used when addressing service members. Throughout his presidency, the use of his name caused Chen to pause for the briefest fraction of a second, a minor breach in protocol, so slight that only he would notice it. But something in the president's voice created a crack in Chen's carefully maintained composure. It wasn't the authority of high office or the weight of celebrity that affected him. Instead, it was the voice of one warrior speaking to another, one person who had carried heavy burdens recognizing another who had done the same. Chen completed his movement and faced north, his body maintaining rigid military precision, but his mind was racing with uncertainty. No one ever spoke to the tomb guards during their sacred vigil. No one interrupted the profound silence that surrounded this hallowed place. Yet something in the president's tone suggested that this was not a casual interruption, but rather something of deeper significance. Obama continued to wait, demonstrating his understanding that he had introduced an element of chaos into a world of perfect order. His years of interaction with military personnel had taught him that discipline was far more than simple obedience to commands. It was a complete way of life, a commitment to ideals that transcended personal desire. He respected the ritual. He was interrupting, even as he felt compelled to proceed. The weight of the Purple Heart in his coat pocket seemed to increase with each passing moment. Captain Jefford's parents had entrusted him with far more than a piece of metal. They had given him the sacred responsibility of finding someone worthy of their son's sacrifice. As he watched Chen maintain his perfect posture despite the obvious internal conflict, Obama began to understand that his search had reached its conclusion. The president's thoughts turned to the countless intelligence briefings he had received about soldiers like Chen, men and women who had performed extraordinary acts of courage in distant theaters of war. He had signed official letters to their families, attended their funeral services, presented their medals, but he had rarely enjoyed the opportunity to speak directly with these heroes, to understand the weight they carried long after the battles had ended and the headlines had faded. As Chen reached the southern end of his march, Obama made his final decision. "Sergeant," he said again, his voice carrying clearly across the marble plaza, "I have something that belongs with you." The words hung in the air like a challenge to the established order. Chen's training demanded that he ignore any interruption, that he maintain absolute focus on his sacred duty to honor the unknown soldiers. But something in the president's tone suggested that this interruption was itself a form of honor, that the break in protocol was not disrespect, but rather a different kind of recognition. Chen completed his turn and faced east, his internal struggle intensifying with each passing second. The Tomb Guard's creed was absolute and uncompromising. Nothing could be allowed to interfere with his duty to the fallen. But the president's presence felt different somehow, as if it were part of the honor rather than a distraction from it. Obama stepped closer while still maintaining appropriate distance, closing the gap between them both physically and emotionally. "I understand this breaks protocol," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying across the space between them. "But some things transcend protocol." The president reached into his coat and withdrew a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of careful handling. He held it with both hands, treating it with the reverence due to a sacred relic. "This belonged to Captain Ryan Jeffords," Obama said, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. "He died saving his entire squad in Fallujah. His parents asked me to find someone who would understand what it means." Chen's perfect military posture wavered almost imperceptibly. The name meant nothing to him personally, but the gesture carried profound significance. He had received his own Purple Heart in a routine ceremony, one decoration among many distributed to wounded soldiers in a sterile hospital setting. But this moment was entirely different. This was personal, a direct connection between warriors, separated by time and geography but united in purpose. The president continued, his words carefully chosen and deliberately paced. "His parents told me I would recognize the right person when I found them, someone who had carried others when they couldn't carry themselves, who understood the true weight of service, who honored the fallen not with speeches but with action." Obama's eyes met Chen's directly for the first time, and in that moment of connection, both men recognized something fundamental in each other. The president saw the same unwavering dedication he had witnessed in countless service members, the same quiet strength that had carried America through its darkest hours. Chen saw not the politician or the public figure, but the man who had carried the weight of an entire nation's decisions, who had made impossible choices and lived with their consequences every day since leaving office. The Tomb Guard's legendary resolve finally began to crack under the emotional weight of the moment. Protocol demanded that he ignore this interruption and continue his vigil, but his humanity demanded that he respond to this extraordinary gesture. When Chen finally spoke, his voice emerged barely above a whisper, not from fear of breaking the sacred silence, but because the moment seemed too profound for normal conversation. "Sir," Chen said, his military bearing remaining intact despite the emotional turmoil beneath the surface, "I'm not certain I'm the right person to receive this honor." Obama's expression softened with understanding, recognizing the humility that consistently marked true heroes. "That's exactly why you are the right person," he replied gently. "Real heroes never consider themselves heroes. They simply do what needs to be done, when it needs to be done." The president extended the wooden box toward Chen, who accepted it with hands that trembled slightly despite his efforts at control. The physical weight of the box seemed disproportionate to its actual size, as if it contained not just a medal, but the accumulated sacrifice of every person who had ever served their country. Captain Jeffords was only 23 years old, Obama continued, his voice thick with emotion that he rarely allowed others to witness. Fresh out of college, planning to become a teacher when his deployment ended. But when that enemy grenade rolled into his squad's defensive position, he didn't hesitate for even a second. He threw himself on top of it, saving 6 men he had known for less than a year. Chen's grip tightened on the box, his knuckles white beneath his ceremonial gloves. The story resonated with painful familiarity, not the specific details, but the underlying theme of sacrifice. He had witnessed too many good soldiers make the ultimate sacrifice, had seen too many families destroyed by the true cost of military service. The weight of their collective memory was part of what had driven him to this post, to this eternal vigil that honored their sacrifice. I carried something similar, Chen said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Obama lean forward. Instinctively, not a medal, but a letter from the man I saved in Afghanistan. He told me that our job wasn't about collecting medals or seeking glory. It was about carrying those who couldn't carry themselves. Obama's eyes widened with recognition and understanding. Here was the confirmation he had been seeking, the proof that his search had indeed led him to the right person. Would you be willing to share that letter with me? He asked, not as a former president making a request, but as one human being seeking deeper connection with another. Chen's hand moved instinctively to his breast pocket, where he carried Ali's letter despite regulations against personal items during duty hours. The letter had become part of his daily ritual, part of his ongoing remembrance of what service truly meant. He withdrew it carefully, the paper worn soft from years of handling and rereading. The letter was written in Ali's careful, precise handwriting, his English grammatically imperfect but emotionally powerful. Obama read it aloud, his voice carrying across the marble plaza. With the respect due to sacred text, my dear brother Marcus, you carried me when I could not carry myself. You put your life at risk for mine when you had every reason to leave me behind and save yourself. This is the job. You told me in the hospital, not the medals, not the glory, not the recognition from others, just carry them. Carry the wounded, who cannot walk, carry the fallen who cannot speak, carry the memory of those who can no longer carry themselves. You are a good man, Marcus Chen. You carry others, and now I carry the memory of your goodness with me into my new life in America. We are brothers now, bound not by blood, but by the sacred weight we carry together. Never forget, the job is always to carry them. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, creating a bridge that connected two men who had never met, but shared the same fundamental burden. Obama's hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter with great care and returned it to Chen, now understanding completely that the young soldier before him was exactly what Captain Jeffords' parents had been seeking. Ali made it to America, Chen said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years and distance. He's living in Virginia now, working as a translator for the State Department. He spends his time helping other refugees navigate the system, carrying them through the process of starting over in a new country. He still walks with a limp from that day, still wakes up from nightmares about the explosion, but he continues to carry others. Obama nodded with deep understanding, seeing how the story continued to unfold. And you carry him, he said simply. You carry his memory, his gratitude, his example of resilience, just as you carry the unknown soldiers here at Arlington. The president's words hit Chen with the force of revelation. For 3 years, he had walked this sacred path, performed this ritual with absolute dedication, maintained this vigil with unwavering commitment. But until this moment, he had never fully understood the deeper connection between his service here and his service in Afghanistan. Both were fundamentally about carrying others, about maintaining the living memory of those who had sacrificed everything, about ensuring that their stories would continue to be told and honored. Captain Jeffords' parents asked me to find someone who would carry their son's memory forward, Obama continued, his voice heavy with the weight of that responsibility. Someone who understood that true heroism isn't about the moment of recognition, but about the lifetime of service that follows. Someone who would honor not just the medal itself, but the man who earned it through his sacrifice. Chen's eyes filled with tears that duty prevented him from shedding, emotions that military protocol wouldn't allow him to express while on his sacred watch. But Obama saw them anyway, recognized the profound struggle between military discipline and human feeling that defined the very best of those who chose to serve. Night had fully descended upon Arlington National Cemetery, and the tomb was now illuminated by the eternal flame and the soft, respectful glow of the memorial's lighting system. The few remaining tourists had departed, leaving only the two men and the silent marble sentinels that stood eternal guard over the unknown soldiers. This was the most sacred time at Arlington, when the boundary between the living and the dead seemed thinnest, when the weight of memory and sacrifice pressed down like an almost physical presence. Obama stepped back respectfully, giving Chen the space he needed to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The Purple Heart contained within the wooden box represented far more than one soldier's individual sacrifice. It was a vital link in an unbroken chain of service that stretched back through generations, a continuation of the story that Chen had been telling with every step of his methodical march. "I should allow you to return to your duty," Obama said, though his words carried no sense of urgency or dismissal. He understood instinctively that this moment was itself part of Chen's duty, that accepting the sacred responsibility of carrying Captain Jeffords' memory was as important as any ceremonial movement or prescribed ritual. Chen stood straighter, his military bearing reasserting itself with renewed purpose and understanding. But something fundamental had shifted in his posture, a subtle transformation that spoke of acceptance, of expanded comprehension of his role. "Sir," he said, his voice stronger and more certain than before. "Permission to continue my watch." Obama nodded with deep respect, recognizing the formal request for what it truly was, not a dismissal of what had just occurred, but a formal acknowledgement that Chen's sacred duty had expanded to include this new and profound responsibility. "Permission granted," he said simply, then added with genuine gratitude, "Thank you, Sergeant, for carrying them all." The president turned to leave, his footsteps echoing softly across the marble plaza, but he paused at the very edge of the ceremonial area, looking back at Chen, who had resumed his methodical march with renewed purpose. The young soldier's movements remained identical to what they had been before, but his bearing had undergone a subtle transformation, not in any way that would be visible to casual observers, but in a way that Obama recognized as the acceptance of a sacred trust that would define the rest of his life. As Chen completed his circuit and turned to face north with military precision, Obama made his final observation. The tomb guard was no longer simply maintaining a traditional vigil for the unknown soldiers, resting beneath the marble slab. He was now carrying the memory of Captain Jeffords, of Ali Nazari, of all those who had served and sacrificed throughout the nation's history. Each step had become a living prayer, each turn a moment of active remembrance, each hour of duty a way of ensuring that their stories would continue to be told and honored for generations to come. 1 year later, Obama returned to Arlington National Cemetery for another private visit, drawn back by memories of that transformative evening. The tomb guard on duty was a different soldier, but the sacred ritual remained unchanged. 21 steps south, sharp turn, pause for 21 seconds, turn again. The eternal flame continued its endless dance in the evening breeze, and the marble sentinels maintained their silent watch over the hallowed ground. But something significant had changed in the interim. In the visitor center, mounted in a position of honor visible to all who came to pay their respects, was a shadow box containing Captain Jeffords' Purple Heart. The accompanying brass plaque read simply, "For those who carry others, in memory of Captain Ryan Jeffords, United States Marine Corps, and all who continue his mission of selfless service." Chen's own journey had continued to unfold in ways that honored both his past service and his expanded understanding of duty. He had completed his tour as a tomb guard with the same unwavering dedication he had demonstrated throughout his service, but his comprehension of that duty had been fundamentally transformed. He had gone on to become an instructor, teaching new generations of guards not only the technical precision of their movements, but the deeper meaning that gave those movements their sacred significance. He spoke to them about carrying others, about the weight of living memory, about the profound connection between the living and the dead that made their service meaningful. Obama stood before the shadow box, reading the plaque and remembering that extraordinary evening when two men had discovered connection and shared purpose in the midst of sacred duty. The Purple Heart gleamed in its protective case, but its true power resided not in the metal itself but in the story. It represented a story of ultimate sacrifice, of recognition and respect, of the unbroken chain of service that connected all those who chose to carry others through their own acts of courage and dedication. The president's thoughts expanded to encompass the countless other moments like this one, scattered across the world and throughout history. In every generation, in every conflict, in every community, there were those who chose to carry others, sometimes literally through physical rescue, sometimes metaphorically through emotional support, but always with the same fundamental spirit of service that had driven Captain Jeffords to sacrifice his life, Chen to save Ali, and Obama himself to bear the crushing weight of a nation's most difficult decisions. As he prepared to leave Arlington once again, Obama caught sight of the current tomb guard executing a perfect turn with the same precision and dedication that had characterized Chen's service. The young soldier's face was set in lines of absolute concentration, his movements precise and deliberate despite the countless repetitions. But in his bearing, Obama recognized the same deep dedication he had witnessed in Chen, the same profound understanding that this duty transcended mere ceremony. It was about carrying the memory of those who had given everything in service to something greater than themselves. The sun set over Arlington National Cemetery, casting long shadows across the endless rows of white headstones that marked the resting places of America's heroes. The eternal flame continued its vigil in the gathering darkness, and the tomb guard continued his methodical march. 21 steps south, sharp turn, pause, turn again. Each movement remained a living prayer, each step a solemn promise to carry them, to remember them, to ensure that their sacrifice would never be forgotten or diminished by the passage of time. In the distance, the lights of Washington, D.C. sparkled like earthbound stars, a glittering reminder of the nation these soldiers had served and died to protect. And in the visitor center, Captain Jeffords' Purple Heart continued to gleam in its honored place, serving as an eternal symbol of the unbroken chain of service that connected all those who chose to carry others, in life, in death, and in the sacred vigil of memory that ensures no sacrifice is ever truly lost.